I know that I tell stories. I write prose, I write poetry, I draw, I create art, and I think I do all of this to feel good. I think that I do this to explore the ideas that come up in my head, outside of my head, whether it's on paper or it's on digital. And ultimately I do this because I want to I want to feel good. And sometimes it's as much to get it outside my head because it just has too many feelings associated with it. So I need to get it out to kind of get a look at it. As it is to just kind of celebrate the ideas that I have in my head. And, you know, these stories and how they make you feel good also have to do with they do make me feel powerful. They feel, my expression of these stories makes me feel like, I guess the ability to communicate them makes me feel like I have an ability to communicate in wider circles than just the page in front of me. And to get feedback on that, or to get connection, or for someone to say that's an interesting story, or I really appreciated that piece of poetry, that kind of stuff feels good. And I've kind of gotten used to that feedback loop. So I like the questions that are a part of this module tool reflection, because the direction of it is kind of what happens when those stories that we tell ourselves start to inhibit or hurt others, because it's about power structures. So stories that we tell ourselves that are in support of power structures that we believe are in place. I think often a lot of the stories in the poetry that I write tend to put myself at the center as kind of making a mistake or being confused, which probably is a good starting point to try and find a little bit of humility. There are times where I just project and I'm kind of identifying something outside of me and I guess kind of calling it out with my descriptive practice. But for the most part, I'm kind of echoing things that I don't understand, or just ideas that I'm sort of wrestling through. But I could completely see how there were times in my storytelling where my reach really didn't have a full grasp on the bigger context that I was going to put the story into. And in that case, it falls entirely in step with the TED talk that we listened to this week, because that projection of my story, if it caused confusion or dissonance in the other person without any sort of reasonable expectation that I wanted to talk about it, then all I'm doing is kind of sending out a vibe or sending out an echo that is a fabrication. You know, I think back to when I was a kid and I had to put together a writing portfolio. I think it was in grade 10. And it was a portfolio about that had to represent your growth over the year of grade 10. So taking into account the different classes and your family context and all that kind of stuff. And my sister got into it and she started reading some of the pieces. And some of the pieces, she's like, this isn't how this happened. Now, on one part, I could have argued, well, that's just, you know, your memory. But I can admit, I actually changed part of the stories just to make it a better story. And thinking of why I did that, again, it goes back to the power thing. I wanted to tell the stories in a way that felt personal, but also felt like I could identify better with the story. So, you know, her analysis of it, that it didn't happen that way, was astute, because technically, according to her POV, it did not. Now, again, at the time I was a teenager, I was just like, whatever. Like, I kind of walked away from the actual story. But it is interesting if the roles were reversed. In my house, I mean, I was the older brother, so I automatically had a little bit of a piece of that power structure to be, you know, a little bit more powerful, a little bit more mature. I had more responsibility. I had more rights than her, let's say. If it had been flipped around where she was the older one and I was the younger one, I could see how her declaration of my stories not being true would have shaken me a little bit. I would have questioned, did I remember it correctly? I don't know if I would have been as cavalier to kind of say, you know, whatever, these are just my stories. So that whole idea about power structures and how stories are told, depending on your placement in that relationship, you can, in a lot of ways, you can break a person or break a people down by insisting that that's not how they are, that's not how the world is. I think about when I first came into teaching, I came in from hospitality, and one of the stories that I carried with me from hospitality into school was that I was the chef, and that what I said was the rule and would be followed, And if the students, and wasn't even thinking about students at the time, but if the kids in the class didn't follow it, then all I really did was get in contact with their parent and tell their parents that the kids aren't following. They're not following the instruction. They have to follow the instruction. This is why they got a detention. This is why I got that, whatever. Part of this is I didn't even give a moment to think about how not talking to the kid first was sort of breaking down the relationship between me and the kid. I just thought, I'm gonna go to the next closest power source, share the story, get the parents to do whatever discipline, so when the kid comes back to me, they're good to go. The story that I was carrying with me from the hospitality, again, was that I was the leader and they were the leadable. And it took me that full year and actually losing some students, losing interest in taking hospitality. They wanted to cook, they wanted to eat, they wanted to be there and learn some skills. I was thinking to myself, they're here because they want a job. Now, again, this was a mindset I had to get rid of. I had to sort of work through this and see that the kids are students, the kids are not staff. But it took me a while to sort of step down from that power structure and start to realize that the frustration that I was having in trying to, my focus was so misplaced that I was thinking that the reason that the course was not going well was because the students were complying. I didn't see myself as the heart of the problem, and I was. My communication to the kids, I was not being effective. My communication with the families, all punitive. I had no doubt that there were families there saying, well, you should drop the course, but it's too late, so you're gonna end up not having any credit also. You might as well stick it out with this guy and just do your best. Some of the things that I learned in that, and that what I was kind of doing in that space was I was deciding whether or not students were kind of worthy of taking the course. And kind of generalizing somehow that because they were not performing according to my rules, they could not perform well within hospitality. Really, had I been, had I had more mentorship, someone probably said, you probably shouldn't be teaching hospitality in high school because this is just not going well. I did have other mentors that kind of were constantly questioning my course design and constantly questioning, like I would come in, I would have a complaint, and someone said, well, it doesn't sound like you're teaching, it sounds like you're trying to run a mini restaurant. And I'm like, I know, exactly, eh? Because I'm thinking that's exactly what I wanted to do, when in fact I actually did need to figure out how to become a little bit more parallel with the students. And I had to figure out how to release some of that power that I had in order for the students to feel like they actually had any space in the classroom. They did not even feel like they had any space in the classroom because I was filling it up mostly with ego, but also with expectations that were not reasonable. I think about the equity issues that I really did create in that classroom. And it did come down to seeing the students with a single story. I guess the only upside was that my high expectation that they could all perform kept on, I just kept on crushing them with it. I just kept on crushing with this. You can do this. You should be able to do this. I believe you can do this. Do this. I wasn't very good. I wasn't good at all. I did not do a great job of connecting with guidance to ask questions about the students. I didn't ask any whys. I didn't do a great job of interpreting IEPs. I didn't do a great job of communicating to parents. I didn't have one-to-one meetings with the kids to sort of figure out, a little bit of feedback. Am I on the right track? So I probably, in that first year, I was telling a lot of stories, stuff that kind of started with, I can't believe that this kid would want to take hospitality. And I was fortunate. I did have a colleague. It was actually I took the course over from another teacher, and she had said to me, she said, have you considered that your course design, the biggest issue with your course design is you. And I didn't even have a place to accept that at the beginning because I was fresh out of faculty. I felt like I knew my trade, and I figured because I knew my trade that I could do this course. Some of the things that I've really come to understand since then, and it has to do with as far as sort of focusing on equity and really being able to see the full picture of a student. So a couple things. One, that behavior is communication. It's not as simple to say that because a kid is not complying that they're doing it against me. A student losing engagement within a course is a relational moment that I am feeding or not feeding. It has to be that clear. And if I don't know, then I need to ask the kid. I need to have conversation time with the communities that I'm serving. I think the other part that I really didn't get a clear understanding of is the idea of seeking invitations into spaces so that you can get to know communities and kids a lot better. Even talking to the parents, I would be telling them stuff. I wouldn't even, my first year I didn't even think to ask, does your kid cook at home? Do they enjoy cooking with the family? And these were all the stories that were happening in the background. So I didn't have a way to sort of even socially connect with the parents. It was all about me as the teacher, keeping the class in order. Your kid isn't in order right now. And a third thing that came out of this is the idea of intersectionality, which is a little bit of a, it's a newer term within EDU. But once I figured out that reaching out and talking to families was a way to actually, to gain experience from the families and people that were sort of like the support system of the kids as well, you start to realize that the hospitality class was not the center of their universe. Even though I wanted it to be, I wanted this to be the anchor. Because remember, I was thinking about it as a job. That's the power position, that it's a job. I started to realize that trying to get a glimpse of the intersectionalities or an invitation into finding out about the intersectionalities gives you a better understanding of the other kind of bits of the network that this kid exists in. And as soon as I was able to kind of come off my power structure and realize that these conversations gave me so much more information to help the kids, to appreciate the kids, to love the kids, then it started to become a little bit more in my practice. I didn't become great at it right away, but I did get better at it. The whole idea that I think when it comes to equity, and this is a new kind of thing that I'm playing with, is sort of watching for the paradoxes and the ands. So the paradoxes where you come to two possibilities and you want to side with one over the other. It's this or it's this. I'm starting to really consider, well, what if it's those two things together? So it's this and this. One of the conversations I was in when I was working with students on suspension and expulsion had to do with the ands, intersectionalities, the paradoxes that some of the kids that we worked with. The student was an amazing athlete. The student was also selling drugs for a living. The student was also living at home, kind of a normal life. And the student was also dealing with sort of like personal reflection about themselves, coming out as gay, and sort of looking at the intersectionality when you get that. Like, a lot of these things are like, they're not necessarily data driven. These are still some of the conversation points that are offered to you. But these, what seemingly paradoxical type of identifications are what makes, the kids that we work with, and I'll extend it to the staff that we work with, is what makes the relationships complex but rich as well. So I guess moving forward off of this and being open to the stories means that, for me, that probably primarily seeking invitation into spaces where people are willing to talk with me and share with me will probably become one of the most valued relationship building tools in my toolkit. It's interesting because at this point some of it is guesswork because I'm not in the role, but I will say from personal experience in the classroom, from my historical and even moving forward, it does work. It just takes time. All right. Thank you. Appreciate you.